Thank you, Fred. Next up, let's welcome William Billy Barquin, who's the Attorney General for the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho, who is here to give us an update on the 2012 U.S. Forest Service Forest Planning Rule implementation.
All right, good morning, everyone. Get closer. All right, good morning, everyone. I guess I got to get closer to this. Again, I'm Billy Barquin. I'm the Attorney General for the Kootenai Tribe of Idaho, located in North Idaho and Northwest Montana, Southwest British Columbia, or Southeast British Columbia, rather. I am also on the Federal Advisory Committee Act Committee for Forest Planning, the 2012 Forest Planning Rule, which was developed in consultation with tribes and with the public. It lasted a couple years. By the way, what do I hit up here to move forward? Hit the arrow? Okay. In full disclosure, I don't do PowerPoints. This PowerPoint was developed by the Federal Advisory Committee Act Committee that I'm on, the FACA committee. So if I mess this up, that's entirely me and not the people who actually developed it. Okay, it works. So why forest planning matters? You're all working forestry, so you understand why it matters. And of course, I want to first start by thanking the Intertribal Timber Council for inviting me here. Thank you for the Coquille Tribe for inviting me into your territory. So we all know why it matters. And, you know, Fred had up a quote from Deputy Chief Weldon about why it matters to Indian people. And we all know it's our territories, our sacred sites, our religious use areas, our subsistence cupboards. It's our treaty rights area. In the Forest Service, the 154 national forests, 20 grasslands, 1 national prairie, 193 million acres of land, they're ours. They border our reservations. They contain our resources. And that is why forest planning matters, because forest planning, you know, theoretically forest planning for the National Forest System is you develop a plan, it's going to last about 10 years, and then we will, you know, as we adaptively manage it and monitor it and implement the forest plan, we will then in 10 years do a new forest plan. Of course, history shows that those forest plans end up having to stick around for about 15 or 20 years if you can even get a forest plan that lasts through the litigation. But we're moving into a new era of forest planning that will last longer, will provide a greater ability of tribes, for federal agencies, states to implement these forest plans in a way that will restore our territories and restore our resources. So the 2012 planning rule, it's a significant change in how the Forest Service does business. You know, the old style of Forest Service, getting a forest plan, going into a back room, having their IDT, their interdisciplinary team, developing the forest plan, and coming out to the tribes and others and saying, here's our plan, what do you think of it? Thank you for your comments, here's our plan that we just gave you, we're moving on. It's completely changed in the 2012 planning rule. The 2012 planning rule is much more interactive, it's much more collaborative, and I think it will result in much better forest plans for all of us. A quick note about the planning rule FACA. In 2012, the Secretary of Agriculture and the Chief of the Forest Service established the committee to provide guidance to the Secretary and the Chief on implementing the 2012 planning rule. We're in our second charter now. Our first charter I'll get to in a second, but there are 20, it says 21, there are actually only 20 of us now. We lost one of our dear colleagues who passed away unexpectedly recently, but we are a very diverse group that involves state and local elected officials. I in the first charter, was the only representative from a tribe. In the second charter, Angela Sanana, who works for the Nez Perce tribe, is on there as well. Represents youth, conservation organizations, motorized and human power, outdoor rec, timber, energy, mineral, private landowners, hunting and fishing, public at large. It's a really diverse group, but Secretary Vilsack was very specific when he was creating the committee that he wanted tribal participation. And I always make a point of saying at the beginning of every meeting when we introduce ourselves that I am not the representative for all Indian people or for all tribal governments. I am the reminder to the Forest Service and to the committee that the Forest Service in the United States has a government-to-government relationship with and a trust responsibility to tribes, and that tribes and tribal people have rights on the national forest that have to be considered and have to be incorporated when we do forest planning. So what we've done so far, in the first, and to be honest, when we first started in the FACA committee, it's such a diverse group of people, I didn't think we would be able to accomplish anything. And a lot of folks hear about FACA committees and think, well, they're kind of a waste of time. They're either a way for an agency to say, yes, I'm seeking input that I will then ignore, or it is such a diverse group of people that you hit gridlock similar to Congress and nothing ever gets done. And I'm pleased to say in the first charter, we actually, despite our diversity and our different viewpoints, we're able to reach consensus recommendations on the forest planning directives. Those directives are now final. I think they were published in February. Took a while to get them out, but the new planning directives are now out there for everyone. They adopted the majority of the FACA committee's recommendations, which also echoed a lot of the public comments as well as tribal consultation. In this second charter, we're working on a few things. We're working with the early adopter forests, some of those forests may be forests in your territories. We're also working on a government participation guide. It's intended to offer advice to tribal, state, and local governments, a bit of a focus on state and local governments, but especially local governments, on how to effectively participate in forest planning. And for our tribes, and from my perspective, it's how we can go as tribes beyond just government-to-government consultation and participate in a number of different ways in forest planning. And with the local governments, we're trying to really drive home this, to counter this idea that we see in a lot of our local county governments out there where they can, thump their fist on the table, say, I invoke coordination and therefore nullify the Forest Service. That's not the law. That's not good policy. That's not how it works. So this guide is hopefully going to counter some of that that attitude of local governments. Additionally, we'll have the Citizens Guide, and the Citizens Guide will help ordinary citizens effectively participate in forest planning. It's kind of a joke as we talk about how do we get more people involved in forest planning. We all know forest planning can be a bit dry. It's probably exciting to most people in this room, but how do we get ordinary people that, they get their drinking water from the forest, they hunt in the forest, how do we get them to really care about the forest, give us their input in forest planning so we can get better plans? And that's some of what the committee is looking at, is how can we encourage people to be more interested in forest planning. Tribes and Alaska Native corporations, as Fred said, the relationship between the Forest Service and the tribes is getting much better. And the 2012 Forest Planning Rule really emphasizes that relationship. It really emphasizes the need to improve and expand the government-to-government relationship with and between the Forest Service and the tribes and Alaska Native corporations. It recognizes what has always been a pet peeve of many of us as tribal attorneys, and I know tribal elected officials as well, that if we do public comment, then that's the same as consultation. And it recognizes that there's a significant difference between public comment and between the public and tribes and Alaska Native corporations. We are governments in the tribes and Alaska Native corporations with rights and responsibilities to our resources and territories. This rule recognizes that and involves us a much greater. It also emphasizes the need for landscape scale planning, to go beyond the forest or district boundaries, to really look at what the forest contribution, the National Forest System contribution is to the landscape. I keep on mentioning in all of our committee meetings that this ITC Anchor Forest Program is a really good example of how to look landscape. And I think tribes are uniquely situated to promote that type of attitude, because we have the reservations, but we also have our religious use, our cultural use areas, our tree rights areas that are beyond the reservation, and so really looks at that landscape scale. And I want to encourage, and I'll get into it a little bit more, I think in this PowerPoint at least, to consider as tribal governments and as Alaska Native corporations to move beyond just government-to-government consultation. At the Kootenai Tribe, we actually are one of the leaders for a collaborative effort that now has a collaborative forest landscape restoration project, a CFLR project. So we lead that collaborative effort. We also cooperate with the agencies we work with. We are considering, with our limited staff, how to do cooperating agency status. the more that we can do even beyond government-to-government consultation, the more effective voice that we can have in these federal agencies, and especially with the Forest Service. And I know as you're working on forest plans and other issues with the Forest Service, you will get some countering from the Forest Service saying we can't have non-Forest Service people on interdisciplinary teams. That's BS. Washington office knows that. It needs to get down to the forest and the district. So if you hear that, say no. We can be on interdisciplinary teams. We can lead the collaboratives. We can be the leaders here as tribal governments because it is what we have always done and it's what we can do better. Okay, so what's unique about the 2012 planning rule? The emphasis on intergovernmental participation is one of the really unique parts of this rule that I enjoy. Like I said, we're moving away Forest Service doing forest planning and then surprising the rest of us governments who are impacted by their decisions with the idea. And by doing more intergovernmental participation, by working better together, we will get better plans because we will be able to help the Forest Service meet its legal obligation while we as tribal governments or state governments or local governments are able to meet our legal obligations as well in a much better way. And you know, we heard from both BIA and from your lobbyist and from Forest Service about the budget. I'm a director of the legal department for the Kootenai tribe, and I know a lot of you are also department directors as well, and our elected officials with a smile let us know, here's your budget, we've increased your responsibilities, we need you to do a little bit more, but I'm sure you'll be able to do it. And as departments, we smile and say, of course we can, that's what we will do. We need to do so in collaboration and in partnership with our other government partners. You know, one example is our forest in Kootenai territory actually were planned under the 82 rule. But when the Forest Service came to us to start discussing the forest plan, they said, here's all of your information on fish and wildlife. Well, the information happened to be about 20 years out of date. The tribe and the state have been doing a lot as far as fish and wildlife, and the Forest Service is really good at the habitat. That's what they manage. The tribe, we're really good at the actual fish and wildlife resources. So we're able to work with them to say, okay, some of your habitat information we didn't have. We now need that. Here's some of our fish and wildlife habitat. And by sharing that information and working together, we're actually able to do more as governments, which is going to be a better service to our citizens, to our resources. And again, the Tribes and Alaska Natives corporations, we have multiple avenues of influencing these forest planning. Government-to-government consultation will always be our big one because that means we can meet separately and privately with the Forest Service to say, these are our tribal issues that you need to respect, that you need to incorporate into this forest plan. But if we also participate in collaboratives, if we lead the collaboratives, we educate both our Indian and non-Indian communities to say, this is what the law requires, this is the information we need. We get your information, we'll get better plans, we'll also get better buy-in from the community, and hopefully get better pushback against those who say, we need to transfer all of the federal lands to the state and local governments because they'll be able to manage it better. We know that's not true, and so we need to do what we can to manage our federal lands in a way that will retain the federal ownership, retain that trust responsibility to the tribes and our treaty rights, but do a better job. Also cooperating with the agencies just on an informal basis and a continual basis. And again, see if you can become cooperating agencies or at request cooperating agency status. Get tribal and Alaska Native Corporation staff onto those IDTs and really greatly influence these plans. The 2012 rule also emphasizes science. It requires what we're calling BASI, Best Available Scientific Information, BAS, whichever acronym you want to use. And again, it does not consist solely of Forest Service information. As the forests are doing their assessments, they need to come to the Tribes and Alaska Native Corporations and to the states, get that information incorporated as part of BASI. A note about this PowerPoint, like I said, I didn't develop it. We developed it as a committee with input from Office of General Counsel, from both Forest Service and Department, OTR, and others. And the PowerPoint says BASI may include traditional ecological knowledge. That was a bit of a compromise with OGC. In my opinion, traditional ecological knowledge is always part of the best available scientific information. If we want insect and disease-resistant forest, fire-adapted forest, healthy forest, talk to our elders. Their traditional ecological knowledge, they know what a healthy forest used to look like. It's probably not what our forests look like now. So talk to the elders, get that information. It will be part of the science. But what we need to do, you know, as I've talked with a few tribes, one of our big questions is how do we incorporate traditional ecological knowledge? And, you know, as tribes, in our planning, we do because our elders are part of our planning effort. But how do we then incorporate TEK into forest plans and into the forest planning process? And we haven't really figured out a good way of doing that. You know, I don't think it's just let's get an elders committee or culture committee involved, get them talking to the forest planning people. I don't think that's going to work. But, you know, so I think as tribes, we need to think together and work together to figure out how we can do that so that TEK is really part of the, I'll stop using acronyms, traditional ecological knowledge is really part of the best available scientific information that really greatly informs our forest plans. Adaptive management is really also emphasized in the forest planning rule, the 2012 rule. Too often in the past we have, of course, we get our forest plan, we start to implement, we get to the end of our forest plan, and we start thinking, what is our purpose and need? What should our forest plan look like? Have we met our goals and objectives from the last forest plan? And then, of course, realize, well, we didn't do any monitoring, so we don't know. We've cut some trees down. We've maybe done a couple things, but we've done a really poor job in the past of monitoring, which will help inform the adaptive management cycle. So this rule emphasizes that. And as a committee, we're emphasizing with the Forest Service, as you're implementing the planning rule, make sure that monitoring and adaptive management is a big part of what we're doing. Budget for it. Work with your tribal and state governments. Some of the monitoring that needs to happen, we can do as tribal or state governments. Even some NGOs might be able to do so. In that way, we will have better forest plans that are adapting, and when we get to the need to amend a forest plan, we actually have information that's relevant to do so. Okay, and I know I'm bumping up against your break, and there's only a few more things to do. So it also emphasizes public participation, and like I said, we're trying to get out to those people who historically have not been involved in forest planning, get their input. You know, the forest, our national forest system, provides drinking water to a great number of municipalities, a lot of whom, even large cities, don't participate in forest planning whatsoever. Well, if you have an urban Indian community that you're related to, get them involved. Let them know that it's your drinking water. You should also have input in your forest plan. And not just the review of the forest plan, here it is. Nobody wants to just review a document, but in the development of that plan, the purpose and need, the assessment, etc. And there's a number of ways that we're looking at to get the public more involved, you know, social media, what have you. There are a number of ways that the committee is looking at. And of course, for our tribal citizens, they can participate either through our tribal governments or as a member of the general public as well. And in addition, you know, like I said, having tribes participate in more than just government-to-government consultation, we should encourage our tribal citizens to participate not just through our tribal governments, but as part of the greater governments as well. So what the planning rule really means for us as tribes and Alaska Native corporations, it's a huge shift. It's a cultural shift in the Forest Service. And it's going to take some time. As we're looking at implementing, we're getting a lot of pushback from districts, from forests, saying, basically, this is not how we've done things in the past. Well, no, it isn't. We're doing things differently in the Forest Service. We're going to be working together a lot more. The Forest Service will provide the tribes a more effective voice to influence forest planning for our religious use areas, for our culture areas, for our treaty rights areas. But we need to be vigilant. You know, I know one of the issues in being vigilant is we get the Forest Service to doing something that, you know, basically we finally train the Forest Service individuals up, and then of course they get detailed, or they retire, or they get promoted, and all that transition really impacts our ability to keep the Forest Service culture moving toward where we want it to move towards. So the committee is looking at transition issues. I know the Forest Service as well, but keep vigilant, keep on them. If you hear from a Forest Service individual saying, you know, the tribe says, I want to be on an IDT, and the Forest Service says, no, we can't do that, call them on it, and then call the Washington office, because the Washington office is committed to this paradigm shift, to this culture shift. It just is going to take a while in a hierarchy like the Forest Service to get it down to the folks down below. And I truly believe, and not just because I'm a member of the FACA committee, but because of my work with the Forest Service as a Kootenai tribe official, I think the Forest Service is going to be a good partner for tribes and Alaska Native corporations into the future. So I don't know if the PowerPoint is actually provided to you all, but there's some other information in the background on the committee, on the rule, et cetera. And I wanted to, if I do have a couple minutes, I wanted to take off my FACA committee hat. 2 minutes? Okay, 2 minutes. It will only take actually one. And that is, speaking not as a member of the FACA committee, but as a Kootenai Tribe official, we heard mention of the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act. It is stupid to keep on treating these catastrophic wildfires not as disasters, to continue rating our budgets, our management implementation budgets in the Forest Service in order to pay for these disasters. So I would really encourage you. Next week, the Fire Funding Coalition is having an advocacy day up on the House to really promote the Wildfire Disaster Funding Act. I would encourage all of you to talk to your tribal governments and Alaska Native corporations, to get letters to the congressional delegations to say, pass WIDFA. It makes sense. It's common sense. We need to do it. And if anyone wanted to send me a letter, as the Chairman Aiken and I are back in Washington, D.C., I'm sure the Chairman would love to drop off your letter for you with whoever we're meeting with. So went through a lot of information quick, and thank you very much.